going to talk about artificial intelligence and how that's transforming the workplace, which is very exciting. Hello. Good, how are you? Do we have a fifth microphone? Sure. Okay, so why don't we have all of you introduce yourselves to the audience here? Do you like to go first?
I'm Antoine Blondeau. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sentient Technologies based in San Francisco.
I'm Chris Wiggins, Chief Data Scientist at the New York Times, and I'm also an Associate Professor at Columbia University, working in machine learning.
Hi, I'm Geetu Ambwani. I'm the Principal Data Scientist at the Huffington Post.
Hey there, my name is Dennis. I'm the CEO and founder of x.ai.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here. So let's talk a little bit just about what artificial intelligence is, because I think recently the term has been thrown around a lot, maybe in situations where it shouldn't be used. So panelists, what does the term artificial intelligence mean to you?
So you're very right about this term being used, overused, misconstrued, misapplied, and all of the above, and a lot more. To me, but I think it's going to be different. The answer is going to be different, perhaps depending on who you talk to, here and elsewhere. But to me, AI is about the ability of a system to make a human-grade decision. Regardless of the complexity of the problem, if you are able to create autonomous decision-making systems, then you've created a type of intelligence that is able to adapt and evolve based on the circumstances that it operates in. And to me, that is what I define as AI. And it goes way beyond machine learning to look at data, a machine learning to rebuild human knowledge. It goes into building new knowledge and new types of decisions.
Anybody else?
We have a rule of thumb around the office, and I couldn't agree more that whatever definition that we come up with, or any definition that you've read over the last couple of years, makes it a little bit hard to kind of figure out, so what exactly is it? But we certainly like the idea of taking any process that was delivered or managed by a human yesterday, which you can now turn into a process which is somewhat managed by a machine, kind of crossed some threshold for where it went from being just a piece of software into something that we might call AI.
I'd say both terms are very old. They're both from the 50s. I don't use them interchangeably. I think about artificial intelligence really as trying to emulate some sort of natural intelligence, usually a human intelligence, and that there's some goal that you're trying to get to. Machine learning, on the other hand, I really think of as a set of algorithms whose performance improves when presented with more data, and they're generally some sort of an optimization algorithm. And one of the things that's important about that for us as humans, contrary to Amal's intro when he said the robots are coming, none of us, as far as I know, is a robot. It's important to distinguish machine learning from artificial intelligence, because usually if you're going to use machine learning with human beings, it means that you have something that you've been able to quantify what success means. And not everything that we do in our lives is something where it's obvious how to turn it into a KPI. You know, many of the things we did, like cooking or news judgment in the case of the New York Times, are things that it's very difficult to quantify with some sort of success metric. Artificial intelligence often doesn't involve any optimization at all. It can be just employing heuristics. And if you look at the original 1955 definition, which was surrounding a particular conference in Dartmouth, it actually had like a birth as a field at one particular event. A lot of the original meanings of artificial intelligence were about using heuristics, sort of rules of thumbs for the way people do things, and implementing those on a computer, not necessarily about optimization. Sorry for that long answer.
Yeah, I agree with what Chris just said. So my background, when I was in graduate school, I used to work in speech recognition, and I think the field actually resembles very much the debates that we have in AI, where you could argue that speech recognition initially used to have, we used to have linguists who used to write grammars, where we used to try to mimic the problem of speech and having a system actually understand human speech. And then we move towards statistical models where you essentially learned that speech, you were able to understand that speech without using these grammatical rules and so forth. And so it's like a combination. I think the ultimate system would be like a combination of both those heuristics as well as data.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The way that people seemingly confuse machine learning and artificial intelligence, especially right now. So where do you think this confusion comes from?
Are you sure it matters? It might matter to us up here. I'm not so sure that it really matters to
Right, like in the mainstream.
some employee in some setting who are tasked to do a given job and really just want to do that job either quicker, faster, or more accurate. He couldn't really care less whether the five of us call it AI, machine learning, or something in between the two. You really want to get from point A to point B, not to shoot down your question.
There are two sets of people for whom it matters. One is aspirants, meaning people who would like to get into those fields. They need to know what books they should pick up. And the other is university administrators who need to know what department to charge for various things or what faculty to bring out to various fundraising activities. But yeah, intellectually, there's a clear bleeding of all those ideas. And we didn't invoke data science, but data science is another one about which there's been lots of existential angst about what actually is data science as opposed to machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. We could go on about definitions all day.
Right, yeah. How have you all seen artificial intelligence evolve over the course of your careers?
Well, I can talk to that because I've been involved in the space for more than 20 years. The team behind my company is the team that designed the technology that became Siri eventually. And believe it or not, in 02 and 03, we had 20 cars in Japan, Toyota cars, running around, not driverless with a driver, but the driver being able to ask the questions that today you can ask Siri or Alexa or any type of an assistant at the same level of accuracy with a very large number of services already. So it took roughly 10 years for this technology to mature. Actually, to go to become mainstream. So, and when we were doing this was clearly the AI winter. And when I started this company 8 years ago, it was still the AI winter. Nobody was talking about big data, let alone AI. So yes, it's evolved in a major way, and not only in terms of the hype, but in terms of what it has become. And I'll cut the next sentences short because I'm sure the other folks want to talk. But effectively, what has happened over the past 5 years is data is available on a massive, on a massive basis. Number one. Number two, compute is available on a massive basis. And number three, the AI science has progressed to being able to address both compute and data effectively. And the combination of the three makes it possible.
Yeah, what he said. So machine learning has gotten much, much better over the last 2 decades. Also, the tech has made it possible to democratize creating machine learning. It's much easier, compute and storage meaning that you can store the data instead of throwing it away, has made it much easier for people to actually build machine learning. And immediately thereafter, sort of an obvious epiphenomenon is all of us accepting AI in our lives, and all of us sort of getting used to, Amazon telling you what to read, and Netflix telling you what to watch, and Facebook telling you everything, and Google telling you what you meant when you had a search query. All of us are sort of acclimated to that in our lives, which is another non-technical or sort of epitechnical phenomenon.
I think, so right out of college, I did simulation type game development for years. And I certainly think if I were to kind of sum up the difference between then, which is sadly 20 years ago, and now, is that the imagination which we had back then is probably not too different from the imagination which we have today. I think the difference to me personally is that a lot of that imagination we've now been able to go execute on. What I'm really excited about is once we've executed on that past imagination, what does the future look like? The things that we didn't even dare imagine 20 years ago, because I could certainly imagine how a certain instance in a game should develop on its own and compete with a set of human players. And today, perhaps in 2016, we can go develop that. but what are the things that I haven't imagined yet upon being able to deliver on that? That's going to be exciting, certainly to me.
I'm still waiting for my Roomba to have some machine learning so it doesn't go round and round like
Awesome. That leads into my next question, which is, what does the future of AI look like, both in the industry and at your respective companies?
Oh boy, the future of AI. So, so first of all, I think there is a misconception in that suddenly machines will become we all believe, or we all I've looked at these movies where we wake up in the morning and suddenly, oh, the network is sentient. It's not going to happen this way. It's going to happen very gradually. Right. It's going to happen very gradually, and we're going to get used to it. And so we're going to augment ourselves before we get replaced. That's the good news. So we'll have fun before we have less fun. But so I think AI is already present across the board, and impacting our lives daily. When you do Google search, you use AI or machine learning, but use a version of it. So I think you're going to see an increasing amount of our daily life being impacted by this in ways that are, first of all, as consumers, effective, fun, interesting, augmenting, and then as people in the workplace, productivity enhancing, and that's a big one. So that's, this is high level, and I'll let the folks talk about the specifics.
Yeah, so one, I think, is increasingly demanding expectations. Monica Rigatti, formerly of Jawbone, likes to use the phrase data natives for all of us who have grown up in a world where we expect AI to make our lives more efficient and pleasant. And when you deal with something that does a bad job guessing what you meant, you're like, what kind of lame interface is this? I mean, 10 years ago, you weren't used to things intuiting what you meant to guess for and giving you the right answers. The other thing, a small tangent, but to bring it back to the talk this morning, Slack has been really useful at making people integrate AI into their process. So let's say that I make some machine learning algorithm and I write it in Python, then I can't make, say, an editor of the New York Times stop what they're doing and fire up Python. But if that editor is in Slack, then I can have that person render, if I can make my machine learning legible, meaning in the form of text, and interact it to the way that you interact with the command line, then I can easily integrate and empower that person with some sort of algorithm that on the back end is really some machine learning. So I think as machine learning becomes more part of our lives, we're all looking towards new ways of integrating into our process. And Slack being one interesting modern expediter of machine learning into people's process, because it makes you don't know if you're dealing with an AI, or as Amazon used to call it, an AAI, meaning an artificial intelligence, which is actually a human at the end of something that feels like you're talking to a bot. So I think there's lots of ways that we will be expecting machine learning as part of our process, and I think people are getting really creative about ways of integrating machine learning into our process.
Going to what both of you were saying, even at the Huffington Post, we find that our editors expect us to expect the machine learning or algorithms or data science to be integrated into their workflow, and it's sort of I think, as Antoine was saying before, that AI has to be sort of like this human in the loop computation. I think much before we have robot overlords. That we're going to have this system that integrates with our workflow. It suggests things to us. It enhances our productivity, and we just get used to it, and that's what we expect.
So perhaps in the midterm, not the long term, not in the command line Slack type interface short term, I think there's certainly some setting for where I can't believe that my future is going from 120 apps on my iPhone to 240 on the iPhone 9. That doesn't feel like the future. That feels like something much, much worse. And if that is not the future, what does that future look like? And we've certainly made a bet, right or wrong, in this idea of highly verticalized AIs or intelligent agents, if you will, that can do specific jobs and do those jobs really well. And outside of that being kind of personally exciting for me, because me and 60 Propeller Head friends spent the last 3 years trying to come up with this intelligent agent that can schedule meetings. But she's obviously not going to, on her own, make the world better. But I think the exciting part is when these verticalized AIs start to speak to each other. So that all I want really is to have a meeting with a potential customer in Miami. But for me to make that happen, I might reach out to my travel agent. I might have Amy from x.ai help me set up the meeting. I might have some agent that collect my receipts and submit them to whatever finance agent, which I also have. But as these agents kind of speak to each other, I think there'll be that moment of not we wake up one morning and things are sentient, which I just don't believe in. That's, if you worked on it, you'll find it to be completely crazy. But I think there'll be some moment for where, as they start to interact, we'll have a feeling of that oracle potentially having arrived, where the meeting got postponed, I need to change the flights, and with that comes new receipts, and I'm there later, so the meeting needs to be in the afternoon, and so on and so forth. That is certainly a half-decade away type future that I can feel, and that excites me. You think my future is coming sooner, that I know.
Yeah, but I think it makes a lot of sense. I wanted to comment on this because it's I think a very good. It's the right way to relate to this as consumers. So I could tell you about what we do in the insurance space or in the trading space, but that's very boring. It's about making money or avoiding people paying claims, which is really, really bad. But what's really much more interesting is how what Dennis starts to talk about, which is content and services becoming intelligent, is about. So if you trace a line from back in the 90s, where the web was born, who was dominating the web at the time? It was Yahoo, it was AOL, and why? Because they were curating the experience. They were telling you how the web was organized, and they were presenting the web to you like a newspaper or a TV channel does. And then when information started to grow, then Google took over. And why? Because it became, I need to fetch this. I need to go and reach out. And Google gave us a controlled, very intuitive way to do that. Fast forward 10 years later, now 2016, what's happening? You've got on Amazon.com, you've got a 250,000, sandals. You've got 2 million, so how do you fetch the right one? How do you pick the right one? You know, summer is coming, or summer is here, 250,000 sandals. You've got 2 million apps on the App Store. So how do you pick the right one? So it's now about these becoming reactive and preemptive to your needs. So the world has to come to you now in a very intuitive and smart way, as opposed to you having to reach out. And so that x.ai, that internet assistant, starts to answer your query, but then the next thing she does is she books your flights before you actually requested her to book, because she understands that the next thing you're going to ask her is to book these flights, right? Or that shoe that you're looking for on Amazon.com, it comes to you before you actually look for it. And then it's very relevant. And advertising at that point doesn't feel like advertising anymore. It feels like a real smart sales associate in a store. And so that's, I think, where we're headed, and that's coming very, very soon. I don't think 5 years, as we discussed the other day in Half Moon Bay, a couple of years.
To expand on that point, I mean, machine learning is a new capability, and I think everyone who thinks about product is a type of artist, and that capability is a new color in that artist's palette. And so all of us are sort of opening up a new phase of design, which is data product thinking, and the design of the user experience now includes all these new colors in terms of how you can design the experience where the artificial intelligence might book the thing for you, or may not, if the designer sees that as a deleterious experience. So I do think that's exciting to think about everything we've said about design thinking as a species in the last 2 decades, and now broaden that to consider how do we design algorithms, and how do we design the product that embodies those algorithms? Because for a long time, the algorithms ended up, in a paper or maybe an API. And now those algorithms are becoming part of the products that we're using all the time and part of our experiences. So I think there's a whole new sort of field for us of sort of data design thinking.
All right, so let's bring the conversation back to the present, and let's dig into the intersection of AI and productivity a little bit more. So, what ways have you all seen AI either increase or influence productivity in the workplace in some way?
Well, there's been, at least in the newsroom, we find it's been a tremendous help to our editors. One of the products we have, which I think the New York Times has as well, is the Slack bot that we were talking about, which helps which basically which uses machine learning to identify articles that are pre-viral, that we think will go viral. And we basically notify the editors on Slack that this is something that has the potential to go viral, so that they can basically distribute it on the appropriate platform, whether it's Facebook or Pinterest, depending on what they think. So things like that are definitely useful. But it's also interesting, as Chris was saying earlier, about algorithm design. Like one of the projects that we're working on right now is that Huffington Post wants to expand its blogging platform, and open it up to everyone. And so when you open it up to everyone, then you have editors having to edit like blogs from, anyone could write that article. So you could end up having a very misogynistic article, you could have a racist article. And so we want to use machine learning to to identify those before we make the mistake of publishing them on the site. And that's obviously a really hard problem just from the standpoint of machine learning itself. But even for a human, actually, it's interesting how many humans, how many editors disagree on whether this article meets our policy or not. And so those kind of things where it's interesting, where it's not just data design, but it's also about how do you take human instincts and human policies and algorithmize those, I guess.
So I'll mention 3 examples. The way we started to apply our massively scaled AI was to apply it to trading. So in the world of trading, you typically need, even in the world of automated trading, all these strategies are designed by humans, and even though sometimes are executed by machines. We set out to be a lot more ambitious and say we'll have a giant network of machines evolve trading and investment strategies on their own. And it takes a long time and it takes a lot of compute. But eventually you evolve intelligence, you evolve trading strategies that are, in terms of compensation, for example, and what it costs to pay a trader or an analyst or a quant. For those of you who are based in New York and you know that very well, it's a lot less expensive. So we don't pay our traders, we don't have any. And so here there's a clear productivity. How do you create an investment manager that is not predicated on very well paid human resources? That's number one. Number two, we're about to release a product that is, we talked about design, using AI to evolve the ultimate website experience. So imagine a website that is tailored to you as you interact with it. So just bypass this and short-circuit this whole A/B testing industry, which is very cumbersome and very slow, but has effectively very, very quickly enabled you to have a dynamic website design that interacts in real time with you, and that's, again, a huge productivity boost. Third, we talked about replacing humans, and we're trying to replace ourselves in our company. So most of the advances in neural networks in the past 5 years have been architecture-based. So you take 10 PhDs and you get them to work for 2 years, and then they come up with a novel architecture that's going to give you a leg up. We think we can use 1 million machines and no PhDs to evolve the same. And so we're trying to replace ourselves. And again, that's a huge productivity boost.
So the way we think about it, being a productivity company, that's really all we do, is not that version that the press kind of portrays, for where if you're a paralegal, I give you 3 years and you'll be out of a job because we can kind of automate that task of being a paralegal. I'm not so sure that I immediately believe that she will be unemployed. I can certainly see of the 87 some odd tasks that she'll have to do in her job, that many of them will be either things she can do but don't want to do, and things that she should do but cannot do. And I think in the category of chores, there's plenty of things that she should be without, for where the human just doesn't add any value. And I think some of those chores are so well defined. There might not be more than our ability to cut away 7 minutes on that chore on a daily or hourly basis, but we should take it. That I certainly find interesting, and our own little contribution to that is cutting away the 2 minutes it takes to set up a meeting, and great, no more, no less. But I find it also interesting on the other side, things that you cannot do but should do. I'm not so sure when I pay Gunderson $10,000 to research whether I'm in patent breach on this and that element, that they really read the 1,000 pages. I think they did some sort of sampling. I'm paying a discount and that's that. That should certainly be a machine for where I'm uncomfortable even in paying the human to try to read the 1,000 pages. And I think I'm in a poorer setting. That's kind of the two avenues I think certainly you can take. Right now I'm on the chore avenue, and it's an easy one to understand, and there's immediate kind of pleasure on being on that avenue.
Yeah, that brings up a really interesting point. How do you see the workplace evolving as AI starts to replace some of these more menial chores?
I can add my 2 cents again. I don't think there'll be any immediate dramatic change to the workplace. If anything, I think all of the employees and what I actually hired them to do will start to align to what I hired them to do. So if you hire a person in pretty much any function, whatever you wrote up, those magical 10 bullets in the job specification, she'll be doing not just those 10. She'll do a lot of shit outside of that she hates and I'm paying for, and everybody's unhappy. So if anything, I think there'll be an alignment towards what I want you to do. If I want you to be a sales rep, or a sales development representative, or a marketing person, or anything really, I think you'll have that pendulum swing towards what we actually talked about 2 years ago. That might just be the optimist in me or the entrepreneur in me talking, and the whole thing is just crazy talk, but I have a feeling that that's where we're headed. It comes back to my chore argument, that those chores certainly weren't in the job description. You can pick the whole personal assistant thing, so I certainly get that thrown back at me at, hey Dennis, I call bullshit on all this. So you're out to kill short of 2 million people in assistant-like roles, so fuck you. And my feedback to that would be, short. I'm not so sure that is true, because any one of those assistants, if they were honest with themselves, don't really like setting up meetings. It's not like they come back and say, that is the best part of my job. I just really like figuring out 1/2, 2/3, not Wednesday, not Thursday. Then he bloody cancels, like, okay, we'll do next week. Then they also hate it. What I would rather, if I had a human assistant, is if I were to meet up with you next week, that she picked you up in the lobby and said, hey, Dennis is up on the 9th floor. I'll walk you into meeting room 9F. If you want a cup of coffee, that 10 minutes, if she could invest that anywhere, it shouldn't be in the email ping pong. So I think the pendulum might just swing towards what we want people to do, certainly in the short to midterm. Optimistic, yes, but there you have it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. We were just having this discussion yesterday at dinner, and it's there's the optimistic part where nobody, like at least if you speak to HuffPost journalists, none of them went to school so that they could identify an article, about like very racist about, I was going to say Donald Trump something, but I'm going to take that off. But essentially, something racist or something insulting a whole section of people for no good reason, right? They went to school to create, to write, to make these things that would emotionally resonate with people. And the more of our time we can free up with that with artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever, that's great. On the flip side, I do think, as Antoine was saying, we are going to get, if we are replacing ourselves also, there is that fear, and I think that fear is legitimate. Personally, as a data scientist, like when I went to school, there was, nobody worked in neural networks or deep learning, right? That was basically none. And I'm taking Coursera classes to teach myself, or Stanford classes to teach myself deep learning. And it can get a little exhausting that you have to continually upgrade your skills, and you have to continually be prepared to learn more, and you have to just get really good at learning. And I think that that's not a skill that we really prepare ourselves for, and hopefully the new generation, that is going to be sort of part of how they react.
If I can make two brief points about human beings, because I'm not sure if there's going to be questions from the floor also, but one point about human beings is, to expand on that point, is that the things that we can replace with an algorithm are often things that people don't like doing. So as an example from Geetu's example, the editors value news judgment, this ineffable quality that makes them, good at the craft of journalism. That is different than keeping in your head 300 URLs that have been published in the last day, cross, 50 different social media channels, cross 48 different 15-minute increments of the day, and thinking about which of those URLs should be slotted for all those things. That sort of media scheduling thing is not news judgment. And so editors are often very happy to have decision support with that sort of thing. The other thing about human beings is that they're very unpredictable and complex. And so when we make machine learning products, you actually are continually training people how to use it. And so the product itself changes, on a multi-month time scale as people use the product in different ways. As an example you've experienced, you probably have looked at somebody else Googling and say, man, that person is bad at Googling. They should be using some other search terms. We are not evolved for that, right? But some people have been trained about oh, I know what are good search terms and what's a good query string to find out this thing that we're both trying to get at. That person should step aside and let me drive. So when you make new data products in general, you get this dynamics where the way that you design the product and the thing you optimized it for changes, which again is why it's nice to have that sort of customer iteration loop where you get to sit down and watch people use it. And Geetu and I are both building a lot of internal data products where we can interview our entire addressable market. It's not like we're building something for the open set of all people who use smartphones. I mean, we have some number of editors. We can just go talk to them and watch them use the product.
All right, how are we doing on time? Just out of curiosity. Okay, great. How about you? Let me bring you the microphone so then people can hear you.
Hi. I'm really curious, what are some of your favorite works of fiction about AI?
A lot. So I think you're not in the business if you don't like science fiction movies. It started with 2001: A Space Odyssey and Blade Runner, and continued with a number, of course, Terminator. And recently, one of the things that we're trying to do is to do the kind of experience that we saw in Minority Report, when I talked about content starting to come and talk to you. You remember Tom Cruise interacting with his big screen, and things come to him, and then he just deals with it very quickly because that content is intelligent and comes to him. So we're doing something like this today in e-commerce, and I can see this happening pretty quickly. Some of the recent stuff is pretty cool, but it just surfs. It does surf on the AI hype. I kind of prefer the stuff that was done 5, 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, when AI was just a distant dream.
I'll give you my favorite movie of late. So you've seen Ex Machina, right? Which is just awesome. Not just because I want to date her, but the movie itself is awesome. And I think the one part in the movie that kind of personally kind of resonates with me is that very beginning, for where it's really supposed to be one long Turing test, and he immediately tells him that, but I can see this is a machine, so there's the end of the test. And the response is one for where that is not the test. The test is that I will tell you it's a machine, but see if you still end up on the other side treating it like a human. And I kind of have, in a very small way, the same setting for where I tell people immediately that Amy is a machine, but I want her to be so good that you still thank her in the end. As in, you take time to write, thank you very much for setting up the meeting this Friday, which happens, by the way. That, I think, is just a beautiful 120 seconds in a movie with a very polite Swede.
I would say my my favorite one, which I think will get dissed by everyone else, was actually Her. I actually liked the Her. Oh, wait, am I saying that? Yeah. So it was. I think as a day-to-day data scientist, you're so consumed with just looking at data points and just doing this kind of relearning your models. Sometimes you lose that really, like when you were talking about the future, right? Like that's the future I want, and it's kind of interesting, a little bit freaky, like it's got all the elements of, and I think it's really about like connection and how is it going to be when we have these, when we have really, really good AI, like how is that, like what is our interaction going to be with that?
I'm one of those horrible nerds that finds something wrong with every sci-fi thing, so I'm actually pretty not, I don't know, maybe Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson, I thought that was pretty well researched. But instead, let me answer a different question, which is, I also echo that thing. When you watch somebody use your product and they say thanks, that's really a powerful moment. So with the BlossomBot, I can remember some time when somebody said thanks, and then another time when the software engineer who built BlossomBot happened to be online at that moment, and somebody got a response from the bot and said gracias, and he happened to be online and he wrote back de nada, and it really freaked people out. That was an example of artificial intelligence.
Do we have time for more questions?
So my question would be, so you're building products that interact with humans mostly, right? And so how important is it that the machine appears to be human? So Amy, for example, is writing me emails or other people emails saying, "Hey, do you have time for a meeting?" And people write back to Amy because they do believe, or they want to believe, it's a human being. Other systems do not try to appear like they're human, right? So why? What is the what's the point about that? Do we want AI to appear like a human being? Do we want a specific AI way to interact with people? What's your point on that?
So I'm obviously heavily biased here, but take my opinion for what it is. Any agent which we put forth, I think we have to decide whether we want to humanize or not. And we can choose to go down any one of those two avenues. And if you choose to not humanize it, you turn it into Google Now, and it's a wonderful product, I'm sure, for many people. And if you do choose to humanize it, I don't think you can go halfway, as in, it'll be a little bit human, and I'll come up with a short syntax as well. So that I just don't think would work. So you have to pick one or the other. What I like about the idea of humanizing it, outside of the raw fact of us just being able to collect better data for where we can make better predictions, because you write longer strings of text, which I can extract value from, is that that near-term future will be a future where there'll be multiple agents, where I don't want the burden to be on you to figure out whether the agent is human or not. I want you to speak to it as if it could be a human, it could not be a human, but I actually don't care. So please, would you be so kind, set something up with Dennis first week of August at his office. And then the burden is on me, machine or human, to understand that. So I'm certainly leaning towards that. So I think it, one, levels the playing field, allows everybody to participate, puts the burden on the receiver, not the requester. And in that new setting, if somehow we believe that there will be a whole lot more agents in the future, we have certainly seen that we have also been able to create some emotion. We can certainly see that when we inject emotion into the system, that we increase the probability of whatever we are optimizing towards. Say we set up meetings, so I'm certainly optimizing towards the meeting being added to the calendar. That's a success KPI, right? When I inject emotion into the dialogue, I can increase the probability. As in, if Amy is sorry for having to reschedule it a third time, even though you know it's a machine and that the emotion is fake, you feel something. Or certainly, from a statistical point of view, people feel something where I can see that end up being slightly better than before.
So humanize, I don't think so. It doesn't really matter. What matters is it is intuitive and it carries this emotion. But whether we need to create robots that look like us, no. I mean, we're different animals ourselves than we were 20 years ago, than we were 50 years ago. Why do we have to replicate ourselves? I don't think we'd have to.
Ultimately, these are all product decisions that are being outlaid, and you should think about it like another product decision. The big risk with trying to make it human is what's called the uncanny valley. So uncanny valley is a phrase that people used to use for computer graphics. Like if you made something look kind of human, but clearly not, it was a little disturbing. So you get that effect with algorithms also. Like if you're interacting with a bot and it's kind of acting like a human and you feel like you're having a nice chat and then the bot says something way off, it's jarring. So it's a product decision. You can make something like clearly act like a bot or clearly try to act, which is risky. You need to have really good AI, literally good artificial intelligence. And then as somebody emphasized, a lot of companies right now are actually doing artificial intelligence. So you feel like you're interacting with a bot, but what's really happening is a bot is suggesting 5 things to a human being, and just like in the scene in the Terminator where he goes down and chooses from 5 different responses, the human chooses one.
Are there any other questions? Yes. Let me come back to you.
Hi. I have a question about the value of human capital. And so in a world where previously we used to think humans are uniquely capable of creativity and decision making, but today we have computers that are writing humorous scripts and creating compositions and doing things that really have seemed to be uniquely human. What jobs do you think that humans really add value to? And as AI continues to move forward, where will humans be the most necessary or useful?
So I'm going to start to answer the question. So let me just make one point. I don't think it's man versus machine. So human capital here includes what we have created. Computers are human capital. The Industrial Revolution is human capital. AI is human capital. So to me, it's really not about whether we are going to replace ourselves, which may eventually be that, but it's really whether as a species we're improving our odds of survival and thriving, effectively building a better world. Whether it means we are replacing ourselves in terms of the biological form which we have, and I'm talking philosophy now. Eventually, you and I, in 100 years when we're all dead, doesn't matter. This generation at that point will make that choice, and it will be at that point a very natural choice. But there's a lot of questions about what to do in the meantime, and which comes back to education. You mentioned it, and how to improve ourselves, we need to re-educate ourselves all the time, and the workplace becomes that. The workplace doesn't become you do this. The workplace becomes you learn this. But that's now. But eventually, human capital is what we create. Is not who we are.
Let me reprise a conversation I had with Professor Yardi at lunch, which is we like to think about a very long time scale in which there's this smooth and painless progress of technology integrating into our lives, and our lives become really pleasant. Perhaps on the time scale of centuries, you can see that happen, but what really happens on a shorter time scale is this very jarring thing where the future enters, and as Alan Kay said, it's not evenly distributed yet. So you get what is often called structural unemployment. That is, you have a set of people who were trained for a job that's no longer there. So to reprise what I said earlier, in general, the things that are replaceable with algorithms are often the things that people don't necessarily want to do, but there's a time scale at which you introduce some new technology, and it is going to be jarring, and it is going to cause shocks. The sort of solutionist or optimist frame on this is that on a long time scale, yes, it makes everybody's life more pleasant and more efficient, and doctors have more time to play golf because the algorithm is suggesting which procedure to do next or something like that. But on the smaller time scale, I think there's always shocks. And those shocks are, I argue, distributed in such a way that the people who can most afford the technology use that technology in ways that benefits those people, right? Which is why you often find, a new technology is introduced and it benefits a particular subset of people. Those people are usually not primarily concerned with immediate distribution of wealth, right? They're usually the people who are able to afford some new technology. It takes a long time for new technologies and new capabilities more generally to democratize.
Cool. I think you had a question.
What role do you guys think empathy plays in these conversations? Do we have to reimagine or retrain ourselves? Or just what role do you think empathy plays, or does it?
It's very easy to answer. It's the first step of design thinking. So if you go see any chart on design thinking, the very first step in solving any problem is empathize. And so if you're building products to be used by human beings, certainly with our data products we built in the newsroom, the first thing we did was customer interviews. The first thing we did was we go talk to editors, ask them about their pain point, observe them, trying to do our own amateur ethnography. I was talking about ethnography and the value of it earlier today in building up a product, but if you're building a product, empathy is the first step, I argue.
Cool. Maybe one more question?
Do you see yourself as a software provider building artificial intelligence, or rather as a company, building, providing a certain job, meaning in your case, scheduling appointments. And then the second question would be, how do you see the, landscape for artificial intelligence providers? How's it going to be in the future? Because now it gets a lot of vibe. There are new providers popping up almost every day. So what will be the key success factor, or how many providers will there be, and how will the landscape be differentiated?
I made a financial bet on this. I can give you my opinion. Certainly one for where I find it hard to imagine a setting for where there's only a handful of future AIs that will have the ability to provide us all the answers for which we have questions, or do all the jobs that you and I can imagine. I find it almost equally silly to that pitch Apple made 8 years ago when they launched the iPhone and said, hey, this is going to be magical because we own the whole stack from software to the hardware down to the chip, where you then look at those 2.5 dozen apps and say, that doesn't really fit a Danish-American entrepreneur in Manhattan with 2 teenage daughters. No, I need different apps. And that's why we have 2 million apps in the App Store. And I think it's equally fair to suggest that nobody of those 5 can imagine even what agents I will want put in place in the future. There needs to be some sort of vibrant industry or community to go engineer those agents for where my needs can be met.
So I have a different view on this, but that's because we've been working on the full stack ourselves, and we're developing what we believe is intelligence that is highly pervasively applicable. So today we apply effectively the same system to healthcare, trading, e-commerce, and we think that you can achieve a level of generalization over time that gets you to that level of performance and versatility. There's a big caveat though. It is still as much an art as it is a science. And so the domain expertise that's required to eventually productize to a particular goal or particular application or use case is still significant. And I don't see this, where perhaps Dennis and I align is for that to happen is a 10-year thing, I think, and not earlier. But still, in the meantime, you can effectively have broad-based systems like ours, which can address very, very different problems very, very, very well.